America did not want this war. An ocean lay between them and Europe's bloodshed, wide, cold, and reassuring. Water had always been a promise, a boundary, a belief that what burned on the other side could never truly reach home. Across that water were names that sounded distant, countries older than memory, conflicts shaped by centuries of grudges Americans did not inherit, different languages, different flags, old hatreds that did not feel American. For years, the nation watched from a distance. Newspapers arrived every morning with foreign headlines. Black ink spoke of trenches carved into the earth, of gas that crept like a living thing, of boys who vanished into mud so deep it swallowed their names. But it was always somewhere else, across the water, across the imagination. Farmers folded the papers and went back to their fields. Factory whistles still blew. Cities kept building upward, convinced the future belonged to those who stayed out of old wars. America told itself a story. That neutrality was wisdom. That distance was safety. That oceans were walls no cannon could cross. It was a comforting story. And comfort, once believed, becomes dangerous. Because history does not move according to comfort. It moves according to momentum. Ships stopped arriving. Telegram wires carried fewer messages, then darker ones. Names appeared in print that sounded familiar, uncomfortably close to home. Still, many insisted this was not their war. Not yet, not ever. But distance is not immunity, and oceans are not silence. They carry echoes. They carry consequences. And one day, America would learn what the world already knew, that no nation is truly far enough away, that history rarely respects distance. And oceans do not stop consequences. The war arrived quietly, not with an invasion, not with foreign boots on American soil, but with telegrams folded too carefully, messages tapped out in distant offices, short sentences, no emotion, only facts that landed like stones. Ships did not return. They were listed first as delayed, then missing, then lost. Names appeared in newspapers, printed small, tucked between advertisements and weather reports. American names. Sons of dock workers, clerks, farm boys who had crossed the ocean believing distance could protect them. Letters stopped coming. At first, families blamed the mail, then the weather, then the war itself. Mothers continued to set places at the table. Fathers waited by doors they pretended not to watch. Silence became a daily companion, louder than any headline. Neutrality began to change its meaning. What once felt like wisdom began to feel like delay. Like watching a fire spread while insisting it was not your house. America told itself it could remain untouched. That oceans were barriers. That ideals could remain clean if hands stayed still. But the war did not respect intentions. It reached into factories and ports, into banks and shipping lanes, into conversations held in low voices after dinner. The question shifted. It was no longer, is this our war? It became, how long can we pretend it isn't? Each unanswered letter sharpened the question. Each ship that failed to return made it heavier. Each name in print made neutrality feel thinner. And then one day, there was no debate left to have. The answer did not arrive with celebration. There were no cheers, no sudden unity. Only a quiet understanding that standing apart was no longer the same as standing safe. America stepped forward. Not with certainty, not with confidence, not even with agreement, but because standing still was no longer possible. They were not born soldiers. They were farm boys who knew the weight of soil better than the weight of a rifle. Factory workers whose days were measured by whistles, not gunfire. Immigrants who had barely learned the word America, yet were asked to carry it across an ocean. Some had never left their counties. Their world had been small and familiar, a few roads, a few faces, a rhythm that repeated itself with comforting predictability. Then one day, their names were called. Papers were signed. Goodbyes were said too quickly, as if slowing down might change the outcome. Now they crossed an ocean. The water stretched endlessly, gray and indifferent. On crowded decks, they stood shoulder to shoulder with strangers who spoke different languages but shared the same unease. No one talked about fear directly. They spoke of home instead, of seasons, of meals, of streets they might never walk again. Uniforms replaced work clothes. Fabric stiff and unfamiliar rubbed against skin that had never known it. Boots felt heavy. Helmets felt wrong. In the mirror, some barely recognized themselves. The men they saw back home seemed farther away with every mile of open water. Rifles replaced tools. Hands that had once repaired engines, lifted crates, or guided plows now learned how to clean steel meant for killing. The motions were taught carefully, repeated endlessly, until muscle remembered what the mind resisted. They learned new sounds. Artillery at dawn that shook the ground awake. Shells that screamed before they landed. Orders barked in accents they struggled to understand. And worse than the noise was the silence that followed, the waiting between barrages when nothing moved except thought. In those moments, fear settled deep, not as panic, but as something colder, something patient. In the trenches, there was no glory. Mud swallowed boots and hope alike. Rain turned walls into slush. Rats moved freely where men could not. Days blurred together, measured not by progress, but by survival. Men learned to sleep sitting up, to eat without tasting, to breathe shallowly when the gas drifted in. Only waiting, cold, fear that settled into the bones. At night, they thought of home, of kitchens warm with light, of voices calling their names, of lives that seemed impossibly distant now. Some wrote letters. Others stared at paper, too long to begin. Words felt inadequate against what surrounded them. How do you explain a place where the earth itself seemed to want you gone? They watched friends disappear, not dramatically, not with speeches, but suddenly. One moment there, the next a space that would never be filled. Grief had no time to announce itself. The war demanded attention before morning. They fought not for conquest. They did not dream of medals or maps. They fought because they were already there, because retreat was not an option offered to them. They fought because someone told them this suffering might prevent another generation from doing the same. They fought for the hope, fragile, stubborn, necessary, that this war might end all others. When the war ended, church bells rang. They rang across towns and cities that had learned to live with absence. The sound traveled down streets where windows had been darkened for years, where names had been spoken softly, if at all. For a moment, the bells promised closure, an ending that could be named, but celebration was uneven. Some people stepped into the streets and embraced strangers. Others stood still, listening, unsure whether the sound was meant for them. Victory arrived without instructions on how to receive it. Some men returned thinner, quieter. They walked with unfamiliar caution, as if the ground beneath their feet could change without warning. Their eyes searched rooms before settling. Their hands startled at sudden noises. When spoken to, they answered politely, briefly, conserving words the way they had once conserved breath. Others did not return at all. Their absence filled homes more completely than their presence ever could. Chairs stayed empty. Coats remained where they had been left. Families learned how to move around the shape of what was missing. Homes welcomed bodies, but not always the people who had left. Some men came back carrying stories they could not tell. Others carried nothing visible at all, yet moved as though burdened by weight no one else could see. The war had ended on paper, but it continued quietly in kitchens and bedrooms, in the pauses between sentences, in sleep that never fully came. The world called it victory. Parades marched through capital cities. Speeches praised courage and sacrifice. Maps were redrawn. Decisions were celebrated. The future was declared secure. But victory did not erase what had been seen or what had been buried. It did not return the nights lost to fear. It did not restore the faces left behind in fields far from home. It did not explain why some survived while others did not. America had helped decide the future of nations. Its voice carried farther now. Its influence reached places it had once only read about. The country stood taller on the world stage, aware of its strength, and of the responsibilities that came with it. Its voice carried farther. Yet it could not decide how to forget the cost. Memories did not fade on command. The images of mud and wire, of smoke and silence, returned uninvited. Men who had crossed an ocean to fight discovered that the distance home was sometimes greater than the distance traveled. Power came with weight. It settled into institutions, into policies, into the collective understanding that what had been done could not be undone. The nation had stepped into the world, and the world had stepped back into it, and the weight stayed. After the war, America was stronger. Its factories hummed with renewed purpose. Its ports moved faster, fuller. Its currency carried weight beyond its borders. The nation spoke, and others listened. Strength had arrived quietly, settling into the bones of the country like a fact no one could deny. Its voice carried farther. Its presence mattered more. But something else had changed. Strength did not feel like innocence. Power did not feel light. The country that had once believed distance could shield it now understood how fragile that belief had been. The war had taught America that oceans were pathways as much as barriers, and that the world's wounds had a way of traveling. The country could no longer believe that the world's pain would never reach its shores. Isolation had cracked. Not all at once, not loudly, but irreversibly. The idea that America could stand apart from history faded, replaced by the knowledge that history would come regardless. Neutrality, once a position, now felt like a pause, temporary and uncertain. Innocence had faded. It did not vanish in celebration or despair. It slipped away in quieter moments, when veterans flinched at fireworks, when conversations fell silent at the mention of places overseas, when maps on classroom walls suddenly felt closer than they used to. America had stepped onto the world stage, not as a conqueror, but as a participant. Participation brought responsibility. It brought questions without easy answers. When to intervene, when to wait, how to act without becoming what one feared. These questions settled into the national conscience, to be asked again and again in years to come. History would remember treaties and borders. It would record signatures and speeches, alliances formed and promises made. It would measure outcomes and lines drawn and powers balanced. Those details would matter, but they would not tell the whole story. But the truth lived elsewhere, in the quiet men who came home and found it difficult to speak. In the way families learned to listen without pressing. In the knowledge shared silently between those who had seen the world fracture and knew it could happen again. The truth lived in the understanding that once a nation crosses a threshold, once it commits itself to the currents of global consequence, it cannot return to the safety of not knowing. Once a nation enters history fully, there is no going back. America entered the world not seeking power, but it would never again escape its weight.